And hello, and thank all of you for joining us today for NCSL's 2013 Top Issue webinar series. My name is John Kuhl, Public Affairs and Media Manager at the National Conference of State Legislators, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Each year, NCSL develops a list of the most pressing and important concerns on state legislative agendas. Today we have a panel of NCSL issue experts who will be discussing education and school reform, everything from resource reallocation strategies to improving school choice. Our panel includes, in the order in which they will be speaking, Dan Thatcher. Dan is a Senior Policy Specialist in NCSL's education program and has been with NCSL for 5.5 years. Michelle Ekstrom. Michelle is the Director of NCSL's education program and has been with NCSL for 13 years. Sunny D. Sunny is a program principal in NCSL's education program and has been with NCSL for 8 years. And last, Josh Cunningham. Josh is a policy specialist in NCSL's education program and has been with NCSL for 2 years. Following the presentations by our panelists, we'll have a question and answer period. To submit a question, please use the chat feature that's located on the right-hand side of your screen. We will try to get to as many of your questions as possible. Thank you again for joining us, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
John, thank you very much, and welcome everyone to the webinar, and hello from the snowy day in Denver. I want to start off by saying that given the time constraints of today's webinar, we will not be going into great detail on the topics lined up for today. If, however, you have questions about any of these topics that did not get answered at the end of the webinar, I urge you to contact Michelle, Sunny, Josh, or myself. We are all very resourceful and, not speaking for myself, highly intelligent and capable people. We would love to offer you and your state any assistance we can and where it is appropriate. The title of the webinar is Drilling Down to Education's Common Core, which has a double meaning. Yes, we will cover the Common Core state standards, but each of the issues we will be addressing today are core issues common to each state. Funding strategies, educator effectiveness, digital learning, and school choice, we have a common theme facing state legislators. These are core inputs toward the goal of strengthening our nation's greatest asset, our youth, by providing them the best quality education we can as adults. This task has been made all the more challenging. Oh, excuse me, I'm trying to switch to the next slide. This task has been made challenging over the past 5 years due to the Great Recession and its impact on state revenue. On your screens is a graphical depiction of this challenge. Adjusting for inflation, estimated fiscal year 2012 state expenditures have yet to catch up with pre-recession level expenditures and are in fact 8.7% below fiscal year 2008 levels. If we were to add federal funds to that figure, the picture improves somewhat to 5.1% below fiscal year 2008 levels. And while federal ERA funds were a boon to education's bottom line, these funds have now dried up. Other pressures have impacted education funding, namely state Medicaid expenditures. The National Association of State Budget Officers reports that for fiscal year 2012, it will be the first time total state spending on K-12 education has fallen below 20% of total state expenditures. This shows the squeeze that Medicaid is putting on education. One cautionary sidebar here, due to differences in reporting K-12 expenditures, is that it is difficult to disentangle whether states reported federal ERA funds as state general fund expenditures or whether they reported ERA funds alongside traditional federal pass-through line item expenditures. So I don't know if we will ever know what the mix is in terms of state general fund expenditures versus ERA funding during this time. On this next graph, depicts the growth in federal education expenditures and their corresponding decline due to the availability of ERA funds. What's interesting here, too, is the precipitous growth and subsequent decline in state bonding, which was one strategy states used to grapple with declining state revenue. This graph depicts the 5-year aggregate impact of the Great Recession on education funding adjusted for inflation. Not shown here is that bonding grew by $85 million over this 5-year time frame. So, given the difficulty of the fiscal climate, we are often asked what states can do to ease the impact of declining revenue and or improve education in spite of declining revenue. The topics we will be discussing during this webinar offer good first start. State policies to strengthen teacher quality, utilize digital technology, or explore school choice options can all ensure that schools and districts utilize utilize existing funds most effectively. New research suggests that class size floors need not be, depending on the grade level, as rigid as once thought either, so long as educators and students have greater flexibility in their school day to move from room to room, from subject to subject. And this flexibility is often provided for at the state level. In regard to special education, if your state does not have a response to intervention policy in place, here is another area to improve education delivery with little to no cost, and which could, in fact, save money down the road. Placing further pressure on an already austere budget climate, 46.5 states are implementing the Common Core state standards for math and English language arts under a tight timeline. I say 46.5 because Minnesota has adopted the Common Core state standards for English language arts only and not math. By spring of the 2014-2015 school year, these states will be utilizing new assessments to gauge students' proficiency against the new standards. The timeline above demonstrates just how much work states have ahead of them, particularly in this year, to prepare for the 2014-2015 school year. And indeed, state legislatures have been very active in anticipation of this deadline. As of this week, legislators in 32 states have filed a total of 89 bills that address the Common Core state standards in some way. This graph depicts the implementation areas legislatures have focused on, with assessment top of their list. Assessment bills often provide an appropriation for the infrastructure needed to administer these computer-based assessments. Other bills prescribe allowable uses of the assessment results. For example, either requiring or proscribing assessment results as a metric in educator effectiveness. Another slew of legislation establishes that proficiency on the Common Core state standards shall be one of the requirements for high school graduation. Other topics addressed by this legislation include curriculum alignment, educator professional development tied to the Common Core state standards, and aligning freshman college curriculum to the standards. Another small subset of this legislation would direct the state to withdraw from the Common Core state standards initiative, or at least delay the implementation of the standards. At this point, I would like to hand it off to my capable colleague, Michelle Ekstrom, to speak in greater detail now about the assessments and educator effectiveness.
Thanks, Dan. So, as Dan mentioned, states are working toward implementation of the Common Core state standards, and with that comes implementation of the new assessments. Under the Race to the Top competition, the U.S. Department of Education awarded 2 contracts to develop the new computer adaptive assessments that would align to the Common Core state standards. Those contracts were awarded to the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness of College and Careers, or better known as PARC, and the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortia, better known as Smarter Balance. States have the opportunity to join the 2 consortia as participating or governing members. In doing so, they agreed to implement the test by the 2014-2015 school year. These are computer-adaptive summative tests used for both state and federal accountability, presumably under NCLB and the waivers as well. States will also have the opportunity to adopt optional diagnostic mid-year tests, or better known as formative assessments as well. On this slide, I've listed the websites for both PARC and Smarter Balance. I highly encourage you to visit those websites. They have a tremendous amount of information about the details of the assessments that they are putting together, as well as the board and the states that are involved in the guidance of these assessments. I also have listed a great resource, the Education Testing Service K-12 Policy Center. They are an unbiased resource of information about both Common Core and the new assessments, and they have a publication called Coming Together to Raise Achievement. And they update this publication periodically, but it is a very comprehensive, unbiased resource of information about the new assessments and the context in which they're being adopted of the Common Core. On the next slide, you'll see the states that are participating and or are members in the various assessment consortia. As I mentioned, states can either be a participating state or a governing state. And with those commitments, with those designations come various commitments. So as states begin to consider the implementation of the new assessments, there are questions that legislators may want to ask as they consider what they need to do and what their role might be in implementation. Will schools have the technology infrastructure to support online computer adaptive tests? I know we've talked to some legislators who have strong concerns about the fact that there are areas in the states that don't have broadband access, so this may be a barrier for implementation of the new assessment. How will the state pay for the new assessment? Many state legislators are wondering if the current amount that they already have allocated for their current assessments on English language arts and math will be enough to cover the expense of implementation of the new assessment. Will districts use both the summative and formative assessments? How will this data be used to inform instruction and policy making? Will teachers and principals have the information and time to adjust instruction to get the maximum benefit of these new assessments? And will policymakers have the kinds of data that they need in order to make informed decisions about how well students are achieving? Will new teachers, principals, and administrators be trained in how? Legislators may need to be in contact with their teacher preparation and principal preparation programs to ensure that the principals and the teachers are well trained to be implementing and using the data that comes back from the new assessment. And much in the same way, they need to ensure that experienced teachers and principals who are already in the schools and in the classroom will be well trained through professional development for this monumental change. And how will the assessments impact compliance with NCLB accountability provisions? The new assessments are meant to be used in conjunction with accountability measures for NCLB, and with states adapting new waivers, states may need to inquire and ensure that the new assessments will indeed meet these requirements, these federal requirements. So now we're going to move on to educator effectiveness. As states are working to implement the new standards and assessments and ensure that all students are college and career ready, it will be increasingly important that we have effective educators in every classroom. And in most states, this continues to be a top policy priority. So the policy buckets that we typically look at when we're talking about educator effectiveness are preparation, recruitment and retention, induction, mentoring, and professional development, new evaluations, and data. With regard to preparation, there's currently quite a bit of pressure to improve educator preparation. It's coming from within the field and from outside of the field as well, to ensure that all teachers will be well prepared for 21st century students. There are a couple of efforts that are going on that I want to share with you. There's an effort from within the teacher preparation field to create a performance assessment, very different from the typical assessments that we would use, pencil and paper tests to ensure that a teacher is ready to teach or be licensed. This would actually be a performance assessment where teachers would be demonstrating their skills. This is currently being piloted and adopted across states, so you may want to check to see if your particular state or any of the university or preparation programs in your state are actively participating in this effort. Also, I do want to mention that AFT is calling for a 3-part bar exam that would actually include the performance assessment. It would go a bit farther. It would also include clinical experience, which many agree is critical to effective teaching, and content and pedagogical knowledge as well. So now we'll move on to recruitment and retention. We know that 1.72 million teachers are going to be retiring within the next decade. That is a huge number of teachers that will need to be recruited for the field. We also know that we need teachers, not just any teachers, but teachers that can teach 21st century skills to our students. We know that there are also areas of particular need in specific states. For example, STEM teachers, special education teachers, urban and rural teachers tend to be needed in most states. So there will need to be efforts to recruit, new and renewed efforts to recruit and retain teachers in these particular fields. Some states are implementing working condition studies so that they can understand exactly what the working conditions are for teachers, why they stay, why they choose to leave. Some states are working on compensation packages, for example, bonuses for those hard to teach subjects, hard to teach areas, geographic areas, performance pay, differentiated pay. But many states are finding that they're only having marginal success with some of these programs. To add to the concern, the cost of teacher turnover has recently been estimated to be as much as $7 billion per year. So legislators continue to look to policies and to borrow from other states where they're finding success in this area. Induction and mentoring and professional development really are becoming an increasingly very important piece of the Educator Effectiveness policy. Induction and mentoring in particular will be crucial. The average years of experience for teachers is quickly dwindling as the average teacher retires. Now we have just 2 years of experience in most classrooms. So induction and mentoring programs that help those beginning teachers become increasingly important. Many states report that they aren't confident in their induction and mentoring programs, and so it will be crucial that legislators investigate whether the induction and mentoring programs that are either offered at the state or local level are adequately preparing beginning and supporting beginning teachers. Professional learning will also be continuing to be an area of emphasis for state legislators. Professional development is already on the books. Most teachers already participate, but many complain that the professional learning isn't targeted to this particular areas of need for teachers. So it will be critical that teachers get professional development, particularly around implementation of the Common Core state standards and with the new assessment. And many states are also working to implement new evaluations that are tied to student achievement. In fact, as many as 33 states over the past couple of years have enacted legislation creating these new systems to evaluate teachers and principals, with a significant part, as much as 50% in most states, based on multiple measures of student achievement. Other components often include classroom observation, portfolios, and student surveys. Many of these reforms are tied to tenure and licensure, so it will be increasingly important that states look to ensure that the evaluation, these new evaluations are correctly implemented and are carried out in a way that actually provides professional learning opportunities to teachers for them to improve in areas where they may be lacking in their evaluations. And last of all, but perhaps most importantly, data will be key to ensuring successful for all of these programs. Excuse me. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So I just wanted to quickly mention that NCSL is putting together an Educator Effectiveness partnership, and they are publishing a guide for state legislators around all of these various policy areas where there are key questions and policy legislators may want to consider as they begin to move forward in these particular policy areas. As you can see, it was made up of a bipartisan group of 10 legislators and 6 legislative staff, and 8 foundation partners came together to meet over the course of a year and put together this legislator's guide. This will be published in, March, early March, and so you should be getting a copy of this on your desk. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Sunny DA, who will be talking to you about digital learning.
Thank you, Michelle. Embedded within all of these complicated issues of education funding, implementing Common Core, educator effectiveness, are discussions about how digital learning can be used in states to help meet goals. So first, what is digital learning? It's any instructional practice that effectively uses technology to strengthen the student learning experience. Digital learning is being facilitated through state policy in a few key areas. One-to-one programs, where each student has a laptop, tablet, or mobile device. Electronic materials and digital textbooks, where traditional textbooks are being replaced with digital content. Support and training for teachers, so that technology is integrated throughout learning rather than a bank of computers in the back of the room. And online learning options, including full-time virtual schools, supplemental online courses, and blended learning, and increasingly online learning graduation requirements. Of course, state legislators want to know whether digital learning works, whether it will improve outcomes for kids. Unfortunately, there are very few long-term studies and lots of anecdotal evidence, both good and bad. What we can say is that researchers studying educational technologies, ranging from educational radio and television, studies of student learning in online environments, have all found evidence of both positive and negative outcomes. Like so many policy options, the question is really changing from does digital learning work to under what conditions digital learning works. Implementing digital learning isn't just adding a laptop or a tablet to an existing program. Rather, policymakers and educators need to think through their goals. First, how do we want teachers to teach? Digital learning allows for a transition from teachers as the sage on the stage to designers of personalized education. Second, how might this change the use of time both in and out of school? Models like flipping the classroom allow students to watch lectures at home and participate in activities in the classroom, with teachers providing individualized instruction during classrooms. And digital learning enables competency or proficiency-based learning, with students earning credits by exhibiting their knowledge rather than meeting seat time requirements. With so many options, the final step, rather than the first, is deciding which technology is needed to meet goals for teaching and learning. So, how are states approaching digital learning? In traditional brick and mortar schools, approaches like one-to-one computing devices are becoming increasingly affordable and available, but there are challenges. Schools must have sufficient technology infrastructure to support so many computers using the internet at once. The devices themselves need to be purchased or leased and maintained, and teachers need to be trained to incorporate computers into their classroom instruction. In 2012, legislators in Alabama and Kentucky set out to study the feasibility of giving tablets or mobile devices to all students and ensuring they have statewide availability of broadband necessary to facilitate the one-to-one computing. States are also rethinking the traditional textbook. As electronic reading devices become more affordable, states have an opportunity to reduce textbook costs and engage students in ways they're familiar with. Using electronic or digital textbooks reduces the need to make large purchases of traditional paper textbooks every few years. E-textbooks can use videos and other interactive features. They can be purchased from private publishers, or they can be developed by the state itself or by universities. To date, about a third of the states made deliberate policy changes to increase flexibility and digital content. Several large states, including California and Texas, have implemented open source digital textbooks, which are free, state-approved digital textbooks that can be quickly updated with current developments and customized for classroom use. In some states, including Arkansas, Iowa, Indiana, and Georgia, new policy has changed the definition of a textbook to include digital content and to allow text funds to be used to purchase technology. Finally, states are taking a close look at professional development for educators to ensure that technology is incorporated throughout instruction. In the past, teachers and textbooks have provided the majority of content and information to students. With the internet and with other digital content, though, students now have access to material on demand. So, teachers can spend time with their students differently. Rather than cost saving, however, this shift in teaching actually requires a significant investment of time and resources. as teachers shift their lesson plans and use of time in the classroom. A handful of states, including Maine and Minnesota, have passed legislation addressing support and training for teachers to better incorporate technology into teaching and learning. Finally, online learning within K-12 education is growing at a rapid pace, providing a new set of options for parents and students. Online learning programs offer courses, academic credits, and support towards a diploma. They vary in structure and may be managed by a state, district, a university, a charter school, a not-for-profit, a for-profit, or other institution. They really vary among the states and districts. Online learning options include fully online schools, also known as cyber or virtual schools, where students are enrolled primarily in online school. Supplemental online programs, which provide a small number of courses to students who are enrolled in a school separate from the online program. And the relatively new blended learning model, which is a combination of online and in-school learning, where students learn at least in part through online delivery of content and in part at a brick-and-mortar location away from home. Online learning options have been the subject of increasing scrutiny as states struggle to ensure student achievement and accountability. Whether run by for-profit companies or affiliated with states and school districts, state policymakers are taking steps to ensure that students are learning. The International Association for K-12 Online Learning is a great resource for legislators and legislative staff. They're suggesting that states implement multiple measures that better capture a true picture of student and school performance, including proficiency, individual student growth, graduation rates, college and career readiness, and closing the achievement gap. In the last couple of years, state legislatures in at least 7 states put in place advisory councils, work groups, or task forces to look at oversight and best practices related to digital learning. As of late 2012, online learning opportunities are available to at least some students in all 50 states and D.C. And I would recommend a great publication from Keeping Pace in K-12 Education, or kp12.org, where they break down each state's online learning options and availability and discuss sort of state policy progress and roadblocks and other issues. And so that's a great resource, keeping pace with K-12 online learning. According to them, no state has currently is currently providing the full range of potential online learning opportunities, which would include both supplemental and full-time options for students at all grade levels. A notable exception is Florida, where in 2011 and 2012, the legislature acted to make a full range of supplemental and full-time options available to all K-12 students in the state. Once these laws are implemented, Florida will be the first and only state to offer both supplemental and full-time options for students at all grade levels. With regard to fully online schools, the growth is slowing somewhat among states, that is, with only 2 new states, Iowa and New Mexico, allowing fully online schools in 2012-13, for a total of 31 states. Finally, in the emerging policy area of blended learning, a handful of states have passed laws in the past couple of years that allow students to choose online courses from multiple providers, with funding following the student. Utah was among the first states to offer course-level student choice, so that students and parents can choose from courses and state-approved course providers. Students are allowed to advance based on competency rather than time. Funding follows the student down to the course level based upon successful completion, and multiple providers are authorized to offer online courses. Several other states, including Oklahoma and Louisiana, have passed legislation with similar intent to provide expanded student options for individual online courses. And a handful of states have enacted legislation or passed rules to make online learning a high school graduation requirement. Those include Alabama, Florida, Michigan, and Virginia, and we do anticipate that trend will continue in the 2013 legislative session. That concludes my remarks about digital learning, and now I'll pass it over to Josh Cunningham, who will discuss issues of charters, choice, and parental engagement.
Thank you, Sunny. I'm here to talk to you about the always popular issue of school choice, which in 2013 is again expected to be a major topic of discussion in legislatures around the country. There are really just a handful of school choice policies that have really emerged as major policy options for states. So I just want to briefly go through each of these listed on your screen and quickly define them and how they differ from each other. First, of course, the most popular is charter schools, which are publicly funded, privately managed schools. They have their own school board, independent from a school district, and they must comply with the same academic accountability measures as traditional public schools. Charter schools have more freedom over their budget, staffing, curricula, and other operations than do traditional schools, but in exchange for this freedom, they must deliver academic results and answer to an authorizing body for them to remain open. The authorizing body is typically a school board or a state agency, but in some states it can also be a university, a nonprofit organization, or a for-profit business. School vouchers are they're vouchers issued directly to the parents by the state and can be applied to the tuition of a private school. Parents can choose among any private school that meets the minimum program standards set by the state, so long as the school has space and accepts the student's application. As a result, the state does not have to appropriate per-pupil education funding for those students who receive the voucher. Tax credit scholarships, which are also referred to as tuition tax credits, allow individuals and corporations to allocate a portion of their owed state taxes to private nonprofit school tuition organizations that issue scholarships to students. The scholarship allows a student to choose among a list of private schools that are approved by the school tuition organization, or the scholarship granting organization, referred to it by the name. The scholarship is then used to pay for the private school tuition, fees, and other related expenses. And again, as a result, similar to the vouchers, the state does not have to appropriate the per-pupil education funding for those students that receive the scholarship. There are also individual tax credits, tax deductions, which are for expenses paid by parents, private school tuition, and other related expenses. And then finally, an emerging policy option are commonly referred to as education savings grants or taxpayer savings grants. And these are directly funded by the state, and the state places a grant of money into a special account for parents. Parents can then withdraw from that account for various reasons, which can typically include private school tuition, private tutoring, college savings, etc. It almost operates similar to a flex spending account, only for educational reasons. In terms of existing programs, there are 42 states in the District of Columbia that now allow charter schools. In the last couple of years, we saw Maine and then Washington become the 41st and 42nd states to allow them. Washington, of course, most recently, where the voters in the last election approved a ballot measure allowing for the creation of charter schools. And you can see a list of statistics here in terms of the number of schools and number of students that attend charter schools. And what's interesting about this is that of the 42 states that have charter schools now, 5 states account for over half of all the charter school students. And so you can see that the number of charter school students are concentrated in just a small number of states, largely. There are 11 states in the District of Columbia who have school voucher programs. And these are typically either target low-income students or special needs students. And again, there are 11 states that have tax credit scholarship programs. And lastly, there are 6 states that have to offer either a tax credit or tax deduction for private school expenses. And then in terms of the education savings grant, only Arizona has adopted this policy. It's proposed in a couple other states. But the way it works in Arizona is, for the time being, it targets, or it's only eligible to students with disabilities. But in 2013 and 14, it's going to be expanded to all students attending low-performing schools, military children, as well as foster children. The activity that we saw in the 2011-2012 biennium was pretty extensive. There are 46 states that introduced legislation that addressed charter schools in some way. 35 of those passed legislation on charter schools. And again, we saw Maine and Washington with new programs. The tax credit scholarships were introduced in 32 states. 8 of those states passed legislation on them. 4 of those 8 were creating new tax credit scholarship programs. And 32 states also considered school voucher legislation. 8 states passed that legislation, and Indiana was the one state in 2011 and 2012 who created a new school voucher program. There were also a couple states that expanded their existing programs, including Louisiana, which expanded the New Orleans school voucher program to cover the entire state. And tying in closely with the issue of school choice is empowering parents to make informed decisions about where to send their child to school. This was assisted in a great deal by the NCLB waivers, which have required states accepting or being granted the waiver to develop a stricter school accountability system and measures. And this will, we've seen a lot of states create school report cards and other school grading systems, which parents can then easily see how schools are performing, which allows them to make a better choice. Now, the challenge that states continue to face is how to disseminate school performance data to parents in a way that they can understand and then use when making a decision. Another hot topic in the realm of parental engagement and parental empowerment is the parent trigger law. And these parent triggers, they allow parents to petition their child's school in order to force some sort of turnaround intervention. These laws exist in 7 states currently, and in 2011 and 2012, they were introduced in 20 states. 4 of those 20 passed legislation creating new parent trigger laws. And in terms of what to expect from 2013 in terms of school choice, we'll definitely see a couple of the states that do not currently have charter schools, take a close look at them. In terms of states that already do allow charter schools, they'll be looking at enhancing both school and authorizer accountability, deciding who exactly can authorize a charter school, how we can more equitably fund charter school facilities, and also regulating virtual charter schools in a way that produces positive results for students. We'll continue to see states considering the tuition tax credits and school vouchers, always a hot topic. And lastly, we'll see states looking to create parent trigger laws again, and then also looking at how they're going to implement their school report cards that are now required under the NCLB waivers. And we're welcoming any questions from you guys. Before we get to that, I just want to make a quick mention of upcoming events that NCSL has to offer. Next week, Tuesday, which is February 26th, we're going to have a webinar on smarter balanced assessments, dealing with Common Core assessments, and that is available to everyone. And then in June, we're going to have an Education Chairs meeting where we'll dive more deeply into resource reallocation, Common Core implementation, and assessment. And then in late June, we're going to have a meeting for legislative staff that's going to focus on charter school policy that will be part of the Education Commission of the state's annual meeting. And so with that, we will welcome any questions that you guys might have.
All right, thanks, Josh. It looks like our first question is a clarification one. Did you say AFT when discussing 3-part bar exam type test? What does AFT stand for?
Yes, I did say AFT, and AFT stands for the American Federation of Teachers. Randy Weingarten, their president, recently called for the three-part bar exam test.
All right, great. Next question, how many new teachers will be produced in the next 10 years?
I actually have not seen statistics on that. Unfortunately, the statistics, though, are that as many as a third of teachers leave after the first 3 years of teaching, and as many as 50% leave after the first 5 years of teaching. So we know that through either alternative preparation programs, which I didn't discuss as much, but is also a concern around quality for state legislators, and through traditional preparation programs, we're going to need a tremendous number of teachers, but as researchers emphasize, it's not even as much as how many are we going to need to produce, as how many do we need to retain. We need to stop the leaky bucket, as they often say.
Staying on that same topic, the next question, are state legislatures considering professionalizing teaching jobs so that people are encouraged to stay, meaning not just simply being paid more, but giving teachers some autonomy with their schools?
That's a tough question to answer. Actually, legislators wouldn't necessarily legislate autonomy for teachers. I mean, that often is a decision that's made at the school district or even building level. I can say that legislators are putting into place policies that ensure the effectiveness of teachers in an effort to boost the teaching profession in order to recognize those teachers that are highly effective. But they also have, on the opposite side of that, accountability that they need teachers to be able to be well-versed in certain subjects. They need them to be able to do what they need them to do. So it's a push and a pull. And actually, as I said, I don't really see that would be, autonomy would necessarily be a policy that legislators would legislate.
All right. Next question is a digital learning question. It asks, what funding sources are available for digital learning materials?
Thanks. This is Sunny. So sometimes there is dedicated state dollars included in a legislation to get a one-to-one program or something like that started or piloted in a handful of districts. Not a huge dollar amount for the most part there. Another way states are approaching this is by redefining or opening up the significant pot of money that goes to textbooks themselves. And it's sort of varying among the states to what extent it allows either digital content to be purchased, but at times it can also be actual hardware or programs. And so then really it's up to the district to figure out their strategy for moving from the paper textbooks to digital materials and how that would play out. And then a third strategy that I mentioned in California and Texas was this concept of open education resources, where the state puts out a call to universities, businesses, and others to develop this open education resource that's basically a digital textbook. And then the state decides whether it meets the content requirements and accepts a certain percentage of those and makes it open and available to all. And those are free and also can be customized.
All right, great. Thanks, Sunny. Our next question, how are states preparing to implement Common Core mastery tests using limited computer resources?
Hi, excuse me, this is Dan Thatcher here, and I will try to answer this question the best I can. And actually building off some of the resources that Sunny had just mentioned, that some of these pots of money can also include spending for technological infrastructure. And I'm thinking, for example, a bill that I've seen in Alabama that expands the definition of a certain fund within the state treasury that goes right now for school building infrastructure for the purchase of athletic equipment, et cetera. They would change the definition to include technological infrastructure as well. So one way to start looking at this is what are the funds existing funds you have in your state, and are the deficits too narrow to include technological infrastructure? But first, it's important to understand what are the minimum technological requirements assessments. And both of the consortia on the website have very detailed, specific minimum requirements for different infrastructure. And so, what operating are your computers operating on, et cetera. The next step would be to actually conduct a technological inventory across your state to see what technology actually exists within your schools. And this can be done, and something we would encourage is that legislators work in conjunction with their state education agency. And the way I've seen this happen before is that the state education agency requires every school to fill out a survey of what computers you have in your school building at the moment and how old are they. And in that thing, then many states have some 6 to 7 year obsolescence requirement on their technology. So they could consider bumping that up maybe 4 or 5 years. So that means the computers have to be replaced every 7 years. Then think outside the box. Instead of buying computers, think about buying tablets. They're cheaper and can do the same thing, and the assessment could be conceivably taken on tablets. The other thing that we could say is consider public-private partnerships, and maybe there are foundations that are willing to work with your state on some type of program that would provide technology. Unfortunately, we don't know if there's the federal funding available for this to go through. Most of the funding has gone to the assessment consortia, but those steps I'd say would be the first one.
All right, thanks, Dan. Staying on this same topic, how is the trend from hard copy to digital textbooks affecting states' budgets for textbook assistance? Are they seeing increased or decreased demand for state textbook assistance given this trend?
This is Sunny. Given the very recent policy changes and the much longer cycles of textbook approval, honestly, I don't think we know. Theoretically, you're going to see cost savings at some point, but I don't think we have great numbers right now. I'd be happy to talk more with you about that after.
All right. Next one is a charter schools question. What are some good state examples in terms of having good accountability measures in place for charter schools?
Well, there's been a couple states that recently kind of revamped their charter school laws, and that you can perhaps look to states like Hawaii, Missouri, and then of course there's Maine that created new charter school laws, as well as Washington, which they've created their laws with built upon the experience of all the other states throughout the last 20 years of charter schools. And so I'd say that those states would be places to start looking. Again, it's states across the country still struggle with how to exactly handle the low-performing schools. It's always difficult to shut down a school, to close a school, no matter whether it's a charter school or a traditional public school. And so that is something that all states need to struggle with.
All right, next question. Are any states changing laws related to teacher preparatory programs, meaning improving the quality of higher education institutions?
This is a great question. This is Michelle. This continues to be an area where legislators aren't quite sure what their policy levers might be. So, again, I might mention we have a legislator's guide coming out here in a few weeks that will provide a whole laundry list of policies states can consider, but I'll tell you just a few. First of all, I think legislators need to conduct an inventory of their state educator preparation policies. Many aren't sure what their policy levers are, and that really varies from state to state. Legislators also need to know where they have shortage areas and if those preparation programs are adequately meeting those shortage areas, and if there's some policy that they might consider that could encourage preparation programs to better prepare those students or to get pre-service students into the pipeline. Perhaps there's even some sort of an effort at the high school level to get those students that might be interested in teaching into the pipeline at that early end of the spectrum. States certainly can tighten their accreditation and reporting requirements. One interesting development that we've been seeing in the past few years is now that states have more robust data systems. Some states like Florida, Colorado, Louisiana, Tennessee can now tie teachers to how well their students are doing and then back to the teacher preparation program where the teachers were prepared. And then that gives the teacher preparation program information about how well their teacher students are doing once they transition to become professional teachers in the field. Most states are not using this for punitive measures right now. They definitely see this as more of a way to share information, important information, and get that back to the preparation programs. There is some talk at the federal level of a regulation that would require that kind of data, and then it would be used for punitive measures. And I might indicate there's a lot of in the states that most states don't have a data system that can do that, and can certainly perhaps not even do that well if they can. So most states are just right now looking at it as a way to provide good information back to the preparation programs. And I might again mention that many states and institutions are moving to a better way of assessing whether or not teachers are prepared to become teacher candidates. This will, many in the field find this to be a really exciting effort because they feel like this will be a better demonstration of a teacher's ability to get into the classroom and do what they need to do and to teach as effectively as they can. And that will also provide information, again, back to the preparation program on where they may be lacking their skills. The other piece of this, too, is that we are starting to see some states where we're seeing legislation or rules and regs that are requiring the preparation programs to teach, adequately prepare their students for implementation of Common Core and to administer the new assessments. So that, again, is another policy lever where legislators can ensure that the preparation programs are going to be churning out teachers that are ready for this new environment.
All right, our next question is a voucher program. It asks, have voucher programs improved student performance in states that have vouchers?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. There's really research that is really all over the place, and pretty much any study that comes out, there's questions about what methodology they use, whether it's sound methodology. For the most part, it's kind of a generalization. There hasn't been a whole lot of evidence that performance has either improved or decreased at all. There is signs that perhaps among some of the more at-risk students, low-performing students, low-income students, minority students, that they tend to respond to school voucher programs and to being injected into a new environment, a private school environment, in a more positive way in terms of their performance than other students do. But again, it's really hard. I mean, just the idea of comparing a private school to a public school is really difficult to compare the two. They're just so different.
All right. Next question, are you aware of any research organization that has developed a framework for operational quality for charter schools?
I would point you to two different organizations that are really involved on the topic of charter school quality and accountability, and that would be the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools and then also the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, and they each have I believe they each have some model legislation and best practices when it comes to charter school policy in general. So they can definitely address those issues.
Okay. What are some important aspects of evaluation implementation that states should consider?
I'll take this one, John. This is Michelle. I'm assuming that we're talking about teacher evaluations, and if not, maybe you can type back in and let us know for sure. But I'll answer it from the teacher evaluation perspective. There are many important aspects that states need to keep in mind. It's super, super important that states pay attention to the research, pay attention to the learnings from other states maybe farther ahead so that they're ensuring they're doing this correctly. This is very important. As I mentioned, we will have some policy options laid out in our legislators guide, but I'll just stick through a couple. It's super important that you establish clear and rigorous expectations for the performance, build a fair system that accurately measures the performance, make sure that the teachers know what's being expected of them, provide school districts the flexibility to create and use their own evaluation system, and perhaps establish a state model that they could adopt if they can't or don't want to create their own. Ensure that data systems can accurately tie a student's performance and growth to a student's teacher, and allow principals to easily access and verify the data. Use multiple and meaningful ratings, and make sure that you're not just saying effective or ineffective. It needs to be multiple rating levels so that teachers have a clear understanding of when they get that rating level, what that means. Ensure that educators receive opportunities for professional learning in areas that are identified in need of improvement. That's going to be very, very critical in order to ensure that teachers have the opportunity to improve their evaluations. And establish clear consequences for continuously poor performance by providing ample opportunities for improvement, and provide a swift and fair appeals process. Direct the state education agency and school districts to collaborate with teachers and their representatives to develop a fair and equitable method of measuring student achievement. I might also mention that this is an area where policy is a little bit ahead of the research, and there's some really important research that just came out from the Measures of Effective Teaching project that's going on, where a group of researchers are looking very deeply at evaluations of what works and what doesn't. The most recent research that just came out discussed the fact that that states can safely use student achievement or student test scores or any measure of achievement. That piece of the evaluation should be somewhere between 33 and 50% of the evaluation. That seems to be a fair and safe place for that piece of the evaluation. They also have found that multiple observations are more important than multiple observers. So it's really important that you have well-trained observers, but that multiple observations are taking place if that is a component of your teacher evaluation. And they also have confirmed that student surveys are a reliable factor in evaluations as well. They often are very important predictors of how well a teacher is teaching. So that can also be a small part of the teacher evaluation as well. So it's really important that you keep an eye on the data. And then one of the most important findings, I think, is that when you're using the multiple measures of student achievement and you're using student test scores, it needs to be multiple years of student test scores. You can't just base a teacher's performance accurately on 1 year test scores. It needs to be as many as 3 years test scores. So it's super important that we're listening to these researchers as we're building these evaluation systems, because these are becoming very high stakes.
Thank you, Michelle. We will end it there. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. Later this afternoon, we'll be emailing out a short survey. If you could take the time to complete that, we'd really appreciate it. In addition to the education webinar that Josh mentioned, the last in our 2013 Top Issues webinar series will be taking place this coming Monday, and it will focus on energy development and transportation priorities. Again, thank you for joining us.